Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Welcome, everybody. Today, we are going to be talking to you about how you can deepen your reflective practice skills. And we're talking to you about this because it's the number one skill that you really need to focus on as a coach when you are developing and wanting to take your coaching to another level. It's also really important to be able to reflect effectively so that you can get closure on coaching clients and you can continue to grow and develop. So, we're going to be sharing with you some questions that you can use to develop and deepen or to inspire your own generation of reflective practice questions. So, there might be some questions that we share that really resonate deeply with you that you haven't asked yourself before. And by all means, scribble them down, make a note of them. Maybe there are other questions that you think, oh, that's made me think it would be really helpful for me to reflect on that. Or you might have some clients pop into your mind and you might immediately start reflecting. So however it works for you, we hope you get a lot of value from our discussion on the podcast today.
Reflective practice really is the unsung hero in coaching. People focus so much on the skills, the questioning, listening. Once you can reflect at a deep level, so much more comes into your awareness, both in the moment when you're coaching and in the after. So we talk about reflecting in practice, which is when you're in the session and things are happening, and your ability to both be present and also have a helicopter view of what is happening between you and your client at the time. And then there's reflecting on practice, which is, as you've described here, Jo, after a session, the ability to look back with a reflective lens and explore different avenues for learning. So, you would really benefit as a coach, even if you're not a coach yet. Reflective skills are so valuable in your career to be able to learn and grow. So, one question that you could start with by looking through the lens of reflective practice is simply, how am I feeling now? And the reason why how am I feeling now is important is because it's the ability to check in, not just through a head place, but through a body sense. So almost doing a body scan to check, what sensations are lingering after that session. So you might have, come off a video call with your client. And if you ask yourself this question, take a moment to really scan through your body. Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling calm? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling nervous? Like, what is happening in your body? And starting to use that as a catalyst for reflection. Because the thing that might follow, so how am I feeling now, might be, and how come I'm feeling that? What is that there for? What is the wisdom that is contained within that sensation that can give me some learning about the session that I've just had?
Yeah, and I think you're talking about your presence, like how are you presently, but also when we think about like how have you been in the session, how are your feelings afterwards, different maybe to how you felt in it. So presence, and you're also tapping into energy there. So other questions that you can use to help you reflect on the essence of those things might be, how present and attuned was I during that coaching session? And what do I think was the impact of that for the client and for you as the coach? So there's an avenue that you can explore with that question. And I guess it's important to also share, you're not going to reflect on all of the questions that we share after every single session. Often one question, two, three questions, probably max is going to be most effective. So with presence and energy, you might also just do a little scan around, what might I have missed emotionally or energetically in the client's communication to me in that session or with me in that session? So you're there exploring like the what if.
Mm.
So you're recognizing that you may have had an experience in the session, but as you replay parts of it, is there anything consciously or even unconsciously that's kind of nagging at you that might indicate something around that? And why do we do that? It's also so that if we feel that there was something there or we're not sure, you might want to check in with the client at the start of the next session. And that may open up, an avenue that's really important or useful or insightful for the client.
Mm.
And you might also want to reflect on any signs or indications or feelings that you were maybe erring towards being a little solution focused in the session, or were you, to what extent might you have been too passive at particular points in that? And obviously then you've got to figure out or reflect on, and what's my reference point for my analysis as to, was I moving towards one of those ends of the spectrum? So hopefully that gives you a little, maybe there's something in the questions around presence and energy that could add something to your either your current reflective practice or maybe your kind of toolkit, because we can get stuck in our reflective practice, in our ways of reflecting on our practice, and we can become quite narrow if we're not careful in the questions that we use or the essence of how we reflect. So I hope that the questions in the discussion today, you might also start to extend that for you.
Mm. I think those questions you asked there, Joe, you can take one step further as well, depending on how much you want to challenge yourself in reflection. So you talked there around, was there anything that I missed? Um, and then I think the extension of those questions is how come? Like, how come I missed it? Because the ability to look back and see, oh, you know, there was potentially something that I could have explored there is like a level of reflection. The next level that might help you attune then back into your skills and your development, like how come I missed it? And that might be simply that you made choices to focus on a particular area of inquiry. It may be you were distracted at the time. It may be that you didn't ground and resource yourself for the session, or something else. Like it doesn't matter that you missed it. It's not like it's looking back with a critical eye around, you know, berating yourself for a missed opportunity. That's really important with reflective practice. It's looking back with kindness, compassion, and curiosity in the spirit of learning, not in the spirit of um, thinking that you're not good enough yet. And I think that is a real importance when it comes to reflective practice. Do it in the energy of learning and growth.
Yeah, and you might also think about, what did I notice and how come I noticed that? What was my focus drawn to in that session? And let me just check in around what the reasons are for that. And therefore, may may I have missed anything else that might have been important for the client? And this is it's with a curious lens, isn't it? There's no right or wrong. It's just curiosity and development.
Mm.
And keeping that flexibility so that we are genuinely there and present in the moment with the client and not in some essence of fixed practice or ways of being as a coach.
I quite like the question, what habits was I using in that? Because so much of what we do in coaching, I was inspired by what you were saying there, Joe. So much of what we do in coaching is habitual. We probably open the session in the same way, or if we have the same client, we may have fallen into patterns with that client. So if you start to look at the lens of like, what are my habits as a coach? And they may be great habits, but they may be there because they've been there for a long time. So similar questions might be, what new things did I try? Or how much courage did I bring to that session to try something new or do something differently? I think really starting to look at yourself and the way that you coach through a lens of, am I being the same each time? How much am I learning and growing along with each client? Like, do I want to or feel drawn to try new things, experiment, challenge harder? That I think is a really useful perspective to look upon your practice.
Yeah, like what could I experiment with next time? So if you look back and reflect on what's been the pattern of the way that you've engaged with the client, and I think this is also, it's important, within your reflection to reflect on the feedback that the client has given you, and also to reflect on how and when do you ask for feedback, and what's the quality of the feedback that you get. And by that I mean, like, how useful is the feedback to you, and how does that relate to the way in which you ask for feedback and when you ask for feedback and the clarity around it. So I think reflecting on that part of your practice and that feedback that you're getting for your client is really, really important. I think all other things you can ask might be, or ask yourself here in your reflections, because reflective practice is asking yourself questions in effect. So we're reversing on it. So you might reflect on, like, what's my client's growth edge? And in doing that, what's my growth edge here in working with this client?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a good one. Like the ability to look at how you can really push yourself, I think, and push yourself and push your client in the spirit of their goals and their desires for what they want to get out of the session, not taking for granted that your coaching is excellent and good, because often clients will, you'll finish a session and you'll do some reflection in the session around, so what are you taking away here, what's been useful. And a coachee is often saying things like, that was a really great session, I've got loads I can take away. It's really made me think, whatever might come up. So it's easy to walk away if you're getting that with like, great, job done, excellent. So checking in with, so how can we go even further? How can we take this to, another level? I think is really useful. And I think as we're kind of talking about reflection, how you reflect can be important as well. So you may journal your answers to these questions. You may think about them, no need to write them down. But how do you access a level of thinking that enables you to go deep in your reflections? So for me, I often find I can be at my most reflective when I'm out walking, and I have spaciousness and I don't have an agenda of how long I want to ponder on a question for. I may be out there on let's say, an hour long walk, often with the dog, and I get to ponder and be peaceful and timely around, noodling on all sorts of different questions. But if I'm particularly focused on my practice, that's how I access almost like a deeper level of thought or reflection. So it's really not just about the questions you ask yourself, but how do you ask yourself those questions? What are the environments that are going to help you to um, deepen your reflective practice and access the parts of your mind, I guess, that are going to be helpful to you?
We had a learner on our emotions coaching practitioner training recently who said that they record themselves, like their stream of consciousness
Mm.
about their coaching practice after a session, which is, I think it's cathartic. It was cathartic for them to be able to do that, but also then to be able to play back. And yeah, I'm quite an externalized thinker, so that stream of consciousness, like, I can do, it's helpful for me to speak things out, to be able to work things out in my own mind. So yeah, I think developing your own practices and asking yourself reflective questions about how you can do that so that you can be intentional about it is important. A question that can be useful as you're continuing to think about your personal growth as a coach can be considering things like, so what biases, so personal biases or assumptions may have influenced how I showed up, how I was in the session today. And to notice how your body and your mind respond, even when you invite yourself to consider that question. So it might be around, essentially, like, what did I learn about myself through this session today? So it's taking a lens around your own development and insights. And for coaches that are starting out, like, a really simple reflection question can be like, what's one behavior that I want to strengthen or reinforce in my coaching as I think about the session today? And what's a coaching behavior that I'd like to be mindful in adjusting moving forwards, in my next session with this client?
When I was hearing your question there around the biases that I bring into the session, I was like, that's actually a really hard question to answer because you almost have to get out of yourself to be able to answer it. It's almost like being asked, like, what are your blind spots? It's like, well, I don't know because I'm blind to them.
Yeah.
And reflective practice, I think, can feel really challenging for some people. And I think the guidance I would give to anybody who is listening to this thinking, I don't even know how I'd begin to answer half the questions you've given, is like, that's okay. It just takes time. It's like a muscle, isn't it? Reflective practice. And the more you do it and ask yourself different styles of questions, different flavors of questions. You may find some that are more accessible than others. So, there are some questions we've shared here which are quite heady. There are some which are more body orientated. Like just start with in a place which is accessible for you. So if it's simply a case of what did I learn? Brilliant. Just start there. Or what didn't go well? Maybe you're someone who can name the things that didn't go well so easily. And that just might be the door through which to walk through. But don't linger in the what didn't work. Once you're able to kind of do what you do easily, is then to stretch yourself into a place of like, okay, look, I'm used to scolding myself and I'm used to picking apart the things that I do. Right now, what I really need to focus on is what I did that worked really well, what I did that really lit my client up, what I did that really lit me up in that session. Like, what's my energy now compared to, when I was coaching a year ago? So just really notice how piece by piece you can start to stretch those reflective practice skills into deeper questions. And before you know it, you might be able to sit in that more like hysterical, like, who am I when I'm coaching? Who am I not when I'm coaching? And maybe you get to then stretch into that zone. But don't start there if you find those questions are too inaccessible, because you don't want to develop a mantra of like, I'm bad at reflective practice, because it's not true. Everybody can reflect. It's just, what's your starting point?
Yeah. I I love that prompt around like how has my coaching developed over the last year? It's an easy thing to not reflect on because you're so busy doing and focusing in right on that session that you've just done. So looking at, helping yourself to reflect on what are the themes, what are the patterns, how have I developed as a coach is a really useful thing to do as a part of a broader reflective practice. And we were having a discussion with a group that we were working with recently, and I was offering them other ways to access reflective practice, either as a catalyst or as a method around like you could draw the dynamics of the coaching session you've just done, or even just like what is the image that comes to mind as I'm I say reflecting on, but also like just still in contact with the session I just had, and and do that in an open heart, open mind way, and then reflect on what you've drawn and what might be in that. I can't remember the exact like instruction I was given on a program, but it was around drawing something, and it was so powerful, it was so insightful. And what was so fascinating is I then started to offer that opportunity to clients, like where it's relevant. And they had the exact same experience of how powerful it was, how cathartic it was. It enabled them to access new insight and perspective because it was using a totally different part of their brain.
Mm.
Likewise, if you're reflecting and words aren't coming to you, but there's something around a session you want to start processing in some way, music, songs, like find another way. Like if you were to ask yourself, like, what song comes to mind when I think about, that client, or, what we've been doing together, or the topic that the client was bringing, for example, that might be a starter point for you to be able to think, that's interesting. And then it awakens a part of you that can then reflect on an aspect of it. So I think the other thing I would say around reflective practice is I don't find I can always get to an answer, if you like, from reflective practice. And it can be easy to think, well, I'm going to reflect on that, and the purpose of that is to get clarity on it. that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's a much longer brewing process, and you make a little, you're like, I wonder if it's that. And it gives you another thing to reflect on, and then another thing to reflect on. And then at some point, something will drop more coherently into your awareness. And then you can decide, what do I want to do with that? Is there some action that I want to take, or is there something else I want to bring into my coaching? Is that an indication of a CPD need for me? Is it something I want to talk to other coaches about? And I guess another lens here that popped into my mind is, I guess the angle of our conversation is really focused a lot on you reflecting yourself in a space at a time. Reflecting with a group, with somebody else or a group of other people actually has a really different um, energy and impact on your reflective practice. And I'd really encourage you to experiment and also to dip into those different ways and things at different times in your coaching practice, because they all bring something different and uniquely valuable.
Mm. I think a really simple way, like how do you get really good at reflective practices to continue your CPD? For me, reflective practice has deepened the more self-aware I become, because two things go hand in hand. As I develop as a person and as a coach, which I do through CPD, and I get to experience, just different ways of thinking, different ways of being in the energy of different people and seeing how they approach things. It widens my lens of like how I think about myself, my practice, the work, the world, however far you want to go. And really absorb myself in the world of self-development and obviously professional development when it comes to coaching. It always has an impact on how deeply I'm able to reflect. So if you'd met me 10 years ago, there's so much I wouldn't have been able to tell you about myself or the way that I work, because I just didn't have the depth of the skill. Whereas today, I'm much able to keep going layers and layers down in my reflection. And I think quite simply, continuing on your professional development path, trusting in the process of different learning programs, your reflective practice will deepen and it will come. It's almost, it's the osmosis, isn't it, of learning and developing through different lenses. The more you're exposed to different methodologies, different styles of coaching, it helps you to think, oh, well, that's really interesting that they do it that way. How do I do it? So that's one level. So don't think of coach training as a one-stop shop. So I've done my coach training, I can fill out a reflection journal. That's great. And as you continue to evolve, so much, there's still so much more to come. And hopefully people that come into the coaching journey do so because they're lifelong learners, and that doesn't it's not an anxious thing. They don't look at that thinking, gosh, I'm never going to get there. It's almost just like a commitment to like, I'm just going to keep learning and growing in this space because of the fun and the joy and the expansion that it brings. So if you've enjoyed today's podcast and you're thinking that you'd really like to enjoy a bit more inspiration, challenge through reflective practice, do come and check out our CPD programs. There's a range of different ones that you can choose from. We've got our emotions coaching practitioner training, which is a really deep transformational program. We've got group and team coaching, which is more about the different psychodynamics and being able to reflect on what's happening in a space between people. And our new one, which is obviously the neurodivergent inclusive coaching program, which helps you to support your neurodivergent clients in a better way. You can find all of those on our website at igcompany.co.uk.